We've refused, we've been reluctant to trade with each other, to see and recognize each other's worth.
Last month, the normally tranquil streets of Antananarivo pulsed with diplomatic electricity. Presidents, prime ministers, and envoys filed into Madagascar's capital for what has quickly been branded the most consequential African political gathering of the 21st century. Officially, it was a Southern African Development Community Summit. Unofficially, it became the venue where Africa announced it would no longer remain a junior partner in the global system. From the moment the opening gavel struck, the mood was unmistakable. Africa had arrived not to plead for a seat at the table, but to serve notice that it was building a table of its own. The communiqué released at the close of the meeting stunned outside observers. It rejected unilateral sanctions as weapons of coercion, condemned the selective application of international law, and called for sweeping reforms of institutions like the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. The statement carried an ultimatum. If meaningful change did not materialize soon, Africa would create parallel structures, an African Security Council, a continental financial clearinghouse, and trade mechanisms insulated from the whims of the US dollar. Western diplomats watching from the sidelines realized they were witnessing a geopolitical pivot. Botswana's president, Duma Boko, put the sentiment into stark terms. He spoke of the trap of self-loathing that had kept African nations reluctant to trade with, invest in, or even properly recognize one another. That era, he declared, is over. The way forward is intra-African commerce, shared infrastructure, and collective sovereignty. His words were calm, measured, almost scholarly, yet they echoed like thunder through the conference hall. The leaders surrounding him nodded, not with polite courtesy, but with the conviction of people who had already decided the debate was settled. Concrete steps accompanied the rhetoric. Delegates announced fast-tracked corridors linking landlocked economies to deep-water ports, one-stop border posts to slash transit times, and a regional logistics depot in Botswana to boost humanitarian response. They spoke of a digital backbone that would connect farmers, engineers, and startups from Lusaka to Maputo, and they pledged new financing streams, diaspora bonds, partnerships with private capital, and a SADC regional development fund to underwrite the massive build-out. Infrastructure, they agreed, wasn't a luxury, it was the bloodstream of a truly integrated continent. Yet numbers tell an even more compelling story. Africa is the youngest continent on Earth. More than 60% of its population is under 25. By 2050, 1 in every 3 people under 30 worldwide will be African. That demographic wave can drown economies in unemployment or lift them into an era of unprecedented innovation. The leaders in Madagascar chose the second scenario. They insisted that any talk of a reshaped world order is meaningless unless it rests on the empowerment of youth and women, who together make up the vast majority of the continent's human capital. Women, in particular, received overdue recognition. Long the backbone of African agriculture, markets, and family resilience, they remain underrepresented in boardrooms and parliaments. Delegates argued that no continent can claim sovereignty while sidelining half its population. They highlighted examples of women-led cooperatives transforming smallholder farming into export powerhouses, and of female tech founders rewriting the rules of mobile money. Their message was categorical. Gender inclusion is not charity, it is strategy. The conversation flowed naturally into the idea of African solutions to African problems. For decades, crises in security, health, and development were met with prescriptions drafted in Washington, Brussels, or Beijing. Results were mixed at best, disastrous at worst. Leaders in Antananarivo said the pattern must end. Homegrown approaches, whether community seed banks using indigenous crops or regional peace initiatives informed by local customs, have outperformed externally imposed blueprints. The Sahel's lingering instability, despite billions in foreign military aid, served as a cautionary tale. Instead of foreign boots, countries are experimenting with joint task forces that draw on shared intelligence and cultural fluency. Central to this new posture is the role of the diaspora. Over 200 million people of African descent live outside the continent, many occupying influential posts in finance, technology, academia, and politics. Historically, the diaspora fought slavery, apartheid, and colonialism from distant shores. Now, African heads of state are asking them to tip the scales once more. this time through investment, advocacy, and technology transfer. The appeal is pragmatic: challenge skewed media narratives, lobby against punitive trade practices, and channel capital toward African startups hungry for scale. In return, the continent pledges predictable governance and lucrative opportunities. Perhaps the summit's most striking feature was its tone. There was no grandstanding, no shouting matches, no revolutionary fist-pumping. Instead, delegates exhibited an almost serene confidence, a quiet conviction that rattled observers more than anger ever could. One veteran diplomat confessed afterward that the calm was chilling, because calm people are usually the ones who have already weighed the costs of their actions and decided to move forward anyway. That calm also masked a sobering awareness of obstacles. Even as leaders celebrated regional peacebuilding advances in eastern Congo and praised silencing the guns initiatives, they acknowledged that ethnic divisions, partisan rivalries, and class disparities threatened to fracture solidarity from within. Several speakers warned that sovereignty cannot be won by governments alone. It requires citizens to elevate collective identity above tribal or party loyalties. Only a unified continent can withstand the mounting pressures of sanctions, climate shocks, and debt traps. Economic vulnerability remains a glaring challenge. Budget constraints hamper the construction of highways, power grids, and data centers. Leaders proposed innovative funding, a blend of sovereign wealth, diaspora investment, private equity, and non-traditional lenders to fill the gap. The emphasis on diversified financing reflects lessons from the past, when over-reliance on any single patron left countries exposed to external leverage. Energy security receives similar urgency. Southern Africa's electricity shortages have stalled industrialization and handicapped small businesses. Delegates outlined a roadmap toward self-sufficiency, expanding hydroelectric capacity along the Zambezi, scaling up solar farms in the Kalahari, and interconnecting regional grids to share surplus. By anchoring power and digital infrastructure, they argued the continent can nurture modern manufacturing clusters, biotech parks, and AI labs, industries where young Africans are already making global headlines. Culture and narrative also surfaced as strategic assets. For centuries, Africa's story was told by those who exploited it. The Madagascar Declaration sought to flip the script. It framed Africa not as a victim but as a vanguard of creativity and resilience. Tech entrepreneurs in Lagos are exporting payment systems copied by banks in Europe. Ghanaian fashion houses influence runways in New York and Paris. Rural Kenyan women leading climate-smart agriculture projects have become models for UN agencies. These anecdotes, sprinkled throughout the summit, served a larger point. Africa does not need imported blueprints. It needs platforms that allow indigenous genius to scale. As the meetings drew to a close, one refrain hovered above every conversation. Africa cannot transform the world order without the participation of its own people. Every African, everywhere. The phrase captured the summit's ethos. The leaders present knew they could negotiate trade terms, build new banks, and even form an African Security Council. But none of it would endure if ordinary citizens remained spectators. The next chapter hinges on whether farmers in Malawi, coders in Nairobi, traders in Durban, and nurses in Dakar feel the ripple effects of diplomatic grand strategy to that end. A set of immediate actions accompanied the expansive vision. Education ministers pledged to harmonize curricula, so a degree earned in Lusaka carries the same weight in Maputo. Health officials announced pooled procurement for essential drugs to slash costs. Central bankers agreed on pilot programs for cross-border digital payments that circumvent costly correspondent banking fees. While none of these steps grab headlines like a speech denouncing the IMF, they form the nuts and bolts of true sovereignty. Back in foreign capitals, reactions ranged from cautious optimism to veiled anxiety. Some analysts hailed the emphasis on self-reliance and regional trade as long overdue. Others warned that estrangement from established financial systems could trigger short-term pain. Yet even critics acknowledged a pivotal truth. African leaders displayed unprecedented unity. The facade of helplessness that once colored international perceptions is cracking, replaced by strategic calculation and, crucially, a willingness to endure discomfort for long-term autonomy. The verdict on whether this gamble pays off will unfold over years, maybe decades. Building parallel institutions will test Africa's administrative capacity. Empowering youth and women will test social norms ingrained over centuries. Maintaining continental unity will test diplomatic finesse when competing national interests inevitably collide. But the summit in Madagascar marked the line between mere aspiration and actionable intent. The die, as they say, is cast. History often pivots on moments that appear modest in real time. Few predicted the Bandung Conference of 1955 would herald a non-aligned movement, or that the Treaty of Rome in 1957 would seed today's European Union. The Antananarivo Summit may belong in that category, a gathering initially overshadowed by global headlines about superpower rivalries, only to be rediscovered later as the place where Africa quietly rewrote its destiny. Imagine a continent where a Ghanaian fintech founder partners seamlessly with a Namibian data center engineer, financed by diaspora bonds purchased in Toronto, protected by an African peacekeeping brigade trained in Kigali, and trading in a currency corridor that never touches the US dollar. That is the picture the leaders in Madagascar sketched. Not a utopia, but a roadmap. Every kilometer of road built, every girl who finishes secondary school, every megawatt fed into a shared grid turns that sketch into brick and mortar time the end. The question is not whether the old world order will accommodate Africa's demands. The question is whether the old world order can remain credible if it does not. The continent that supplied resources for Europe's industrial revolution and manpower for America's railroads is no longer content with the margins of history. It seeks and increasingly seizes the center stage. So the world watches, some with apprehension, others with hope. In Antananarivo, Africa spoke in a new language, confident, inclusive, unflinching. Whether this becomes the dominant tongue of the 21st century depends on decisions still to be made in village councils, startup incubators, parliament chambers, and diaspora boardrooms. But one certainty emerged from Madagascar: Africa is finished asking politely. It is moving, and the rhythm of that movement already sounds less like an echo and more like a drumbeat.